Hey y'all, how you doing? God, I'll tell you, it's not every day I get to deliver a speech like this to a packed house. But everybody out there on the internet, you're really missing out. This is Get More from the Google Plus platform. Hi, I'm Timothy Jordan. I will be your developer advocate for the next 60 minutes. Let's just jump right in. There are three things that I want to talk about. The first is implementation. Second, optimization. And third is measurement. And it's these three steps sort of provide a foundation for doing more with most things, but I'm going to go specifically through how to get more from the Google Plus platform. Right? And the idea is to get more engagement from your users and to get more in value out of that engagement at any one of those steps. Let's start with implement. So I'm going to give you a survey of some of the things that you probably already know about, and maybe a couple new things. First off, the easiest way to implement the Google Plus platform is to start with one of our plugins. We have a +1 button, which is about letting visitors quickly recommend your brand and your content. A share button, which is an easy way for people to share content with their circles. And it's particularly useful when the +1 button doesn't make sense. For example, if you don't want users to make a public action, you want to give them the option to just make a private action. Also, sometimes you want that verb. You want the verb share within your UI. And then, of course, the badge there. And the badge has a +1 button. It also has a link to your Google Plus page and the ability for users to add the page to their circles right from your site without having to leave and go to Google Plus. Of course, the +1 and the share, whether they're on the badge or standalone, all drive social annotations and search. And we just announced a few days ago recommendations on the +1 button. How many of y'all seen this? Cool. It's neat. I mean, now you hover over the button and you get recommendations for other content on that same site. Right? It's giving the user more value while they're on your site, and it's great for interlinking. We all know recommended content is great for user engagement and continued capture. And so those are the plugins, and remember the plugins are the place to start, right? And the next step about implementation I want to talk about is putting the pieces together, right? Connecting the things that you've already implemented, right? The table stakes here are the identity on Google+, right? That's your Google Plus page. And linking that identity from your site. That's something like the badge or another link code that's invisible on your page. And then finally, making all of that drive more clicks on the ads that you're already serving with AdWords. And all of this centers around your site and your brand. And the goal is to make it a single entity wherever Google refers to it and uses it. So starting with the Google Plus page. The Google Plus page is all about just getting your identity on Google and giving you the ability to interact with your audience in that sort of personal Google Plus way, with circles, with rich posts, with conversations, with Hangouts. Now, on the page, you'll notice right there at the bottom is this little website, yeah? And this is great because users can go to your profile and they click on that and they go to your site. But it's also a signal to Google. It's important to fill this out because then Google knows that the owner of this Plus page has claimed that site as the same entity. That's step 1. Right? And that's the website address that sends, that again connects that page to the site. Next step is to claim the Google Plus page from your site. And this creates a bidirectional link, right? So we have from the page to your site and then back from your site to the page, and then we can know with confidence that both sides of this equation agree these are the same entity. Now, claiming that on your site is as easy as adding the Google Plus badge. And you get the benefits of that +1 and the follow button right there on the page. However, if you don't have room for that on your home page or you want to link it another way, you can always add, right down at the bottom here, you'll see a link rel publisher. And that links to your Google Plus page as well. right, the last step here is if you're using AdWords to enable what we call social extensions. And what it does is it makes it so the plus ones on your ads share the same bucket of plus ones for that entity that I've been talking about, which is your brand. And the cool thing about this, right, it's really easy too. You'll notice the dialog box there. That's in your AdWords management console. You go in there, add in the Google Plus page ID, and now we know that that's all the same entity. And as I was going to say, the cool plus about this, if you have more plus ones, that's more opportunity for social annotations, which means I see on an ad that my friend Will Norris has plus one to this product, and I'm more likely to click on it. In fact, on average, you're 5 to 10% more likely to click on it, right? Which, as far as a CTR lift, is pretty big. All right, so we've talked about plugins, getting started. We've talked about connections, making that all have a little bit more value. Let's go into some higher order features here, starting with Hangouts. Now, once we launched Google+, and people started using Hangouts out there in the world, we knew something that we thought was going to be cool was really cool, right? What people are starting to do with Hangouts is really amazing. Here you see President Obama in a Hangout connecting with American citizens. Like, that kind of discourse is new and absolutely incredible. But in addition to this sort of front porch of the internet, if you will, are the ability to write your own applications that users can play with, can do work with each other at the same time. Now, there is a talk that you should check out at Google I/O this year. So the next generation of social is in a Hangout. Follow that link. You'll be able to see the video and check out the slides. But some quick notes. There's three main things. One, it's easy integration of video chat. Once you make the app, video chat just comes along for the ride. It's baked in. Simple APIs make your app real time so that people can actually collaborate in this application together. And the ability to make it fun with effects, right? Face tracking and video effects to make it more of a joyful experience, whether it's for work or just for play. And there's some examples on the screen of really cool Hangout apps. And if you go to our demo stations, you'll see some really great Hangout apps that people have built. And there's a lot of interactivity, and there's some really fun nuance in there. But getting started is so much easier than that. You don't have to build a full application. All you have to do is put your content in a Hangout. And I want to show you what this looks like. OK, so I have an example site. And you'll notice that it is not the prettiest thing in the world. That was on purpose. It's so that you can take a look at the code, and I'll give you this URL later. It's so that you can see these things implemented in a relatively clean environment. I mean, I did add 4 shades of gray, though, so I hope it's a little interesting. I'm going to show you this site, which is Random World Photos, and all it's doing is taking some images from a Picasa album on my account and putting them on the home page, and then when I click into them, I see a one-up of that image. But I've also integrated the Google Plus platform throughout, so you can see all the little bits and pieces and how the connections work together. One of which is this Hangout button. And I wrote a Hangout app, and it took me about 10 minutes. All this Hangout app does is start a Hangout with my content in it. And in this case, it's just a simple image. But you can imagine the content on your site there. It could be a simple image, and that's interesting and engaging. Or it could be a video, or it could be a live stream with stats on the side. So you see, here's this image, and it was just on that page of the site, and now I'm in a Hangout, spending time with my friends, talking about this. In this case, it's just a photo I took out of a plane while I was waiting to take off. But again, what if it were your content? What if it were breaking news? And you just made this all possible with, as you'll see in just a moment, a few lines of code. So first off, here is the link to the Hangout. It's just an href. that includes a URL with the data encoded. Right? You'll notice right up here it says GD equals, and then I'm using some template syntax to put in the Hangout data. In this case, I'm adding in the URL to the image. Now, you do want to be careful with this data because it's being sort of passed around the internet, and if somebody were to intercept it and modify it, then that could make it not the Hangout experience that you had intended. So you just want to make sure that when that data comes in that you verify it, and there's a number of different ways that you could do that. You could pull out the domain and then insert your own domain just to make sure it's coming from the right place, for example. So this will grab the image from our server, display that button, and when you click on it, starts a Hangout, sending in that data. Now, the Hangout itself is first defined by an XML file. You'll notice in this XML file a few things. Right up at the top, we have different features. We have a title. And then we're including the Hangouts JavaScript. Again, this is just really a little bit of code, and I copied and pasted this from our documentation. Now, this part here, this your application code, I added in a couple things. This is all you really need to do. I've got app data, where I'm grabbing the app data using the API, and then I'm setting an image. Now, down here below the script tags, I would just put in a tag for the image, and that's just inserting that. Right? So it's really 3 custom lines of code to get my content into a Hangout for a full video chat experience with people, my audience, connecting over my content in this new space. Pretty cool, right? But then when you go from that, right, that's where you start. Where you go from that gets even more exciting, right? Adding in that interactivity, using those effects APIs, doing something real-time and collaborative is where you get even more power out of the Hangout. Next thing is the Google Plus History API. Now, we just announced this week at Google I/O, and it's an early developer preview, right? So it's not available for users yet, but it is available for developers to start testing and playing with and giving us some feedback before we release it to all users. And this is the thing. It's pretty much like instant upload, but for almost anything. And who here is familiar with instant upload? Oh, still a few people that aren't. Okay, this is how it works. I have my phone. I turn on instant upload. Now, every time I take a photo, it gets uploaded in the background to my Google Plus account, to a private album. So it's just for me. I log into Google Plus, and I see all the photos I've taken that day, that week, that year, ever since I turned on instant upload. So it's cool. Like, it's a safety thing if I lose my phone. But then it's also a nostalgia thing. I can go there and just sort of review all my photos whenever I want to. And then finally, I can share really easily if I want. Yeah? I'm not going to share all my photos, but there's going to be a few I want to share with my friends circle or with public. Google Plus History is about making that happen for users' activities online. And the key thing here is for that user to have the ability to privately save their moments into Google Plus History and then optionally share when they want. Now, I'm giving a few talks about this at Google I/O. If it's of interest to you, please check those out. But let me give you a quick overview of how it works. First off, this is the general path, right? Get something, an activity that the user performs online into Google Plus History as a moment, right? And the user's history will be filled with these moments, and they're all just for them, private. And then when they want to, they can share that activity with their friends, their family, their public, however they want. There's a few steps just getting started. First, you set up your application. Second, you authorize the user. And third, you write moments. And these are using technologies you're already familiar with. First off is the APIs console. Who's familiar with the APIs console? Heard about it at Google I/O? Oh, for a few of you that aren't, this is just a website at developers.google.com/console where you define your application, add the services like Google Plus and Google Plus History that you want, and then you can get something like a client ID. You then use that client ID to start the OAuth process. The user will be presented with a permissions screen. They add the permissions, get directed back to your site, and then you write moments. And you use a RESTful API to do that. Essentially, you send a JSON payload to this RESTful endpoint that includes a type, the activity that was performed, like a comment or a listen, and the target URL, which is the activity that was performed on, like a blog post or the song. And then finally, a result, if there is a result. So in the case of a comment, it would be the comment that you actually wrote. Now, for writing moments, again, just take you through that flow here. We did the write step, sending that JSON payload. But then there's this next step of fetching. Now, once Google gets the target URL, it'll grab that target URL and try to determine what that page is about. Who here is familiar with microdata markup? Just a couple. Okay. This is really interesting, and I think increasingly important for all publishers to know about. Microdata markup, it's in the HTML5 spec, so it's fully, it'll validate. And then schema.org uses microdata markup with its own types and item properties to give your web page some intelligence. Yeah? Without markup, a machine reading your web page will read a bunch of content. But with the markup, you get to tell that robot exactly what your page is about, what item it represents, of what type, and what are the primary properties it should use to represent that item. And in the case of Google Plus History, we'll use those to render a moment, and if the user shares, a post that include a rich image and the title that you specify and a link that you specify back to the item. And it turns out schema.org markup is good for other things as well. In fact, it is the markup of choice of all three major search engines, both Yahoo and Bing and Google. So that's Google Plus History. It's all about giving your users the ability to save their moments privately and optionally share them with whom they want. Now let's talk about mobile. Now we just had a mobile session in here, yeah? And if you want more information about that, please check out that session. Francis and Julia go into a lot of detail about what's available for Google+. I'll give you a quick overview. The sign-in button. And this is something that's also in developer preview that we released with the Google Plus History API that initiates the OAuth flow. It's a button on your page that we render. You just set up some attributes. The user clicks on it, and it starts that flow automatically. Makes it really easy to get going with the API. And it also does cool things like login and cross-platform identity. And it's available soon on mobile. Widgets. We've got the +1 and the share available. And then, of course, the history API is available too, so that users can save their moments not just from their web activity, but also from their mobile app activity as well. And again, that session, integrating Google Plus into mobile apps with Julia and Francis, is available online. All right, let's look at a couple more things on this example site before we move on. I just wanted to point out some of the things here that I'm going to talk more about. First off, we've got the badge right up at the top. And the badge comes in two different sizes, right? There's the bigger size that includes a +1 button at the bottom, or the one without. I've chosen the one without. You can make it dark, you can make it light, right? There's a little bit of flexibility here for fitting this into your page. The +1 buttons, you'll notice that I have multiple ones on the page. With the +1 button, you can just sort of sprinkle these as you would. It makes sense to have them on leaf nodes, right? So they're the representative of a single item. But you can also add them on categories, to +1 that category, or in a listing so that all those items, you can +1 those before going into them if you just want to. I can +1 these previews of the image. I don't have to go into the image to +1 it. I've also included on here inline annotations. So if people knew about this website before today, they would have +1'd on here, and I would see faces and names of the photos that people like. And when I click in, you'll see, again, the +1 button and the Hangout. Now, if I were to +1 this, which I'll do in another example in a moment, you'll notice it's highlighted here. I go back to the home page, highlighted there as well. It's the same entity because it's specified by the URL, which is this, right? This is the URL for this item. All right, we'll come back to this in a few minutes. So that's implementation. It's a survey of a lot of our platform elements and how they work together, really emphasizing the connections between those things. And a couple of the higher order stuff like Hangouts and Google Plus History and mobile, which are actually have really accessible entry points, but you can go pretty far with them. So for optimizing, there's a few things I want to talk about. First off is that schema.org markup. I talked about it a little bit. I want to give some more detail. And again, rendering the moment or a post for Google Plus History API is good. But this schema.org markup works for everything that you share on Google Plus. So if a user grabs your URL and pastes it in, we're going to retrieve that page and look for the same schema.org markup as if we do for history, or if they share from the +1 button, or when we're looking to render rich snippets on Google search. Now we'll look for other markup styles as well. Schema.org works the best in this case, we think, so we're going to look for that first. If we can't find it, we're then going to look for Open Graph markup. If we can't find Open Graph markup, we're going to look for meta tags. If we can't find that, we make our best guess. Now, working up from the bottom, our best guess, we're pretty good guessers, but given the choice, I would imagine that you'd want to specify how you look rather than have us guess. As for meta tags, you can't do an image. You can only do the title and the description. And they work pretty well, and you can put them in the head, but having that visual component we find is really powerful for having engaging posts on Google+. All right, so let's look at what this appears like in code. Here is some schema.org markup. Now, this is just a body section with not very much content. I just want you to focus on the markup here, and it's these items. So for those of you that weren't familiar with microdata markup, it's essentially data that we put inside the tag. Yeah? So there's these attributes, item scope and item type. You put that on the parent tag to specify that's the whole item. The item type's value is the actual type from schema.org that you're specifying. Now, there's some generic types and some specific types. You could make everything a thing, but then the whole world knows less about your site, right? It can't put more intelligence into it, right? So by specifying, in this case, a product, we get additional attributes that are very product-specific that we can add. Now, I've just included the sort of generic attributes that you'll always want to include. And those are name, image, and description. The name you'll see as the title on that post. The image is the thumbnail that you'll see. And the description is, of course, that description below both of those. Now there's Open Graph. And you'll see we have a title, an image, and a description. And there's also the meta tag. And you see the title and the description. Looking at this in a page, which I think is always really interesting, you'll see that there's all sorts of content, and then there's just these highlights throughout that represent the structured markup. Key takeaway here is that first, the user doesn't see it. Whether you have the structured markup or not, it doesn't change the appearance of your web page in the browser. Also, you don't have to add any content. Most likely, the content that you would want to mark up is already on your page. You just have to indicate what's already there. And then finally, to reiterate, adding the structured markup to your page makes it more than just a web page, right? It's adding this intelligence that Google and other search engines and Google Plus can all use to represent your page with more clarity. All right, so that's structured markup. Next up is speed. I like that. You want to see that again? Really fast buttons. So my friend John and Malte did a session about this, how we make JavaScript widgets scream, and it's really interesting, all the little things they've done to make these buttons appear as fast as possible on the site, and it's something that we're always working on. So in general, any implementation you do should have a fast button, and it should get faster over time the better we get at it. But if you want the specific fastest implementation, I asked John, and he told me this is it. you'll notice a couple quick things. First off, we have the script tag, right up there at the top, and it's including parse tags explicit. That means this script is not going to walk the DOM and look for script tags. It's going to wait until we tell it exactly where to render a button, which we do right after the script tag. Now, you would probably put these at the bottom of your body, but you could include them right after the last tag where you want to see a button as well. Now, this gappy.plus1.render method will allow you to specify an ID. That's the ID of the element that you want to replace with a button. And then a JSON parameter bag. And in this case, I'm specifying an inline annotation. But any of the attributes on the button you can include here as parameters. And you'll see these are the ID. It just sort of links up with that div tag at the top. And of course, the annotation is what gives us this nice thing. And let's just see that in a template. It looks a little bit like this. What I'm showing a couple different template examples, and the idea is that with just a couple changes, if you have templating in place, you can affect thousands of pages across your site. In this case, even if I have tons of buttons on a page, and this is simply the code for the example site that I showed you, I can still specify each one of those buttons with the render function. That's why they show up so quickly on that site. All right, so that's speed. The next is user experience, and there's just a couple notes here. There's a lot of, I talk to publishers a lot, and one of the questions I get frequently is, how do I put the buttons on my page so that users will use them? And I usually ask them, well, it's like, I don't know, you guys should experiment with this. But over time, we found that there are at least two things that are sort of obvious, but let's just codify them, that will get more clicks. One of them is prominence. If you hide the buttons away, they're not going to get clicked on as much. It's sort of obvious. But it's specific to your site. Right? For some sites, it makes sense to have it at the bottom because everybody always reads the whole article. Right? You have a really long bounce time, which means people are spending time on that page, and they're scrolling down. For other sites, a lot of users might just be reading like the title or the paragraph or whatever the user behavior is. Maybe they're more likely to click at the top or at the bottom. But having that correct prominence for your site is what's essential. The next thing is grouping. This is sort of obvious, is that social actions are very familiar with each other. You put them together so users know where to go to click. And here's an example on the New York Times website, and you'll see right up at the top of the article there, we have those social actions so that users on the Times can share this right away. I also wanted to show an example from Time. Again, this is right below the headline and before the article. And what you'll notice about these two sites is you go to article to article to article, and it's very predictable where those buttons are, and they're always easy to find, and they're always near each other. So I would switch back to the site, but we already saw this. Remember, the +1 button is next to each image. Very predictable where that is. And when you go to the actual image page, the +1 button and the Hangout are right there together, the same on all the pages. Oh, there's one other thing I'd like to show you, too, before we move on. So I told you I was going to +1 something in a moment. Let's do that right now. And you notice a couple things happen. On this site, something happens that happens on every other site. The share box comes up. You +1 something, you get a share box. Another thing happened, which is, I think, pretty obvious, is that we got a big red border around the image. Sort of a silly thing to do. But I'm demonstrating a signal here. And that signal is when the user clicks on it, something happens. And something happens on your site, not just on Google. Right? These social annotations are important because when I +1 something, Will may see that later and be like, oh, Timothy +1 that. That's important. But making them important on your site, too, is really helpful. In this case, on this particular site, you'll see that red border around the image on the image page. And now when I go back to the landing page, all the images I've +1'd have this red border. So this signal has indicated to me my favorite images on this site. And what else could you do with this? Aside from just indicating to the user or thanking them, you could keep track of what they're +1'ing, and you could recommend at the moment of the click alternate content. Hey, you +1'd this hat. Here are 3 other hats similar that you might want to check out. And you can do that based on that action with just, again, a few lines of code. And it looks like this. I put this code together again in the render function so you could see the callback in context of, again, using that render function to get them to render really, really fast. And it's just this item right here. I'm specifying the +1 callback identifier as a function in the global JavaScript namespace that should be called when the user clicks the +1 button. I just threw it in the parameter bag. Remember where I specified inline annotations earlier? Same thing. Then I need to make sure to define that function, again, in the global JavaScript namespace of the page. Here it is, +1 callback. And it receives a parameter that I'm calling data. The first thing I do on this particular site is I get the ID of the photo, which I'm actually just pulling from the URL. I then set a cookie. And then finally, if the state is on, oh, it's yellow here. I changed it to red. But either way, I'm setting a border on the image. And if it's off, I'm removing that border. And then finally, when I rendered these buttons, just coming back to the code you saw a few frames ago, you'll notice this code down here as well. Is if the cookie was set to on, I render that border again. Now the border is, again, just sort of an example signal, so you can see the functionality of this, and so it can get your ideas flowing, but also so it makes it easy to implement. But what else could you do on your particular site that makes it really valuable for the user on your site that they +1 something? Okay, so we've done implement, we've done optimize. Let's now talk about measurement. So you can measure the value of the +1 button and how people are using it using Google Analytics. And you can also do it using Webmaster Tools. Now, Google Analytics will show you engagement on these buttons and who's clicking what. And Webmaster Tools will give you some really cool things like the +1s on your site, understanding them a bit more, and the CTR uplift. But of course, as a developer talk, so I want to talk a little bit about our own code and to mention that you can write custom analytics. In this particular case, I'm using the +1 button. Now remember, the +1 button has a callback, which I can use to drive my own analytics on my own site. And that's what this is right here. Yeah? This +1 function is getting called when the user clicks on the +1 button. And then if it's on, I'm sending a method, or I'm sending a signal to my custom analytics that it was a +1. And if it's off, I'm sending a signal to my analytics that it was un+1, if you will. It's pretty neat, right? All right, so when I was putting this together, I thought, well, what else could I do that was kind of fun that used the API? Now, this is not a robust analytics solution. I wouldn't say deploy this at your organization, but it does demonstrate how easy it is to use the API to get a little bit of data out of Google so that you can make the experience better on your Google Plus page. You'll notice on every post that you make, there's these numbers. There's the +1s, there's the reshares, there's also the number of comments if you count them up. And that gives you an idea of how users are engaging with the content that you publish from that Google Plus page. Plus ones are that Me Too action, right? It's very easy for users to add that when they feel some sort of affinity. Reshares are that viral reach. The more of those you have, the more places your content is getting, the more groups are seeing it. And then comments, those are your direct interaction with your content. And all of this is available in the API. So if what you wanted to do was, sort of improve your posting over time, you could just pay attention to these numbers. And for fun, I threw it into an app script. So it looks like this, right? As a spreadsheet that pulls the API and fills out a bunch of information based on the posts I've made, and then gives me some graphs. And it looks like this, right? Here's the app script itself, and this is all sort of spreadsheet information except for this one thing. We get the feed of all of my posts using this fetch request, and then the rest is really just parsing. I'm going to show you what that looks like for fun. Right, so this is the spreadsheet, and you'll see that it has a URL to all of my things, and I've gone here and I've categorized them, and then it sets automatically the plus ones, comments, and reshares. And you can see I can get a summary of all that data, and I make my own graphs. And this is all because of some simple app script. Now again, this is not a robust or dependable analytics system, right? You wouldn't want to build a business on this, but it's really a great place to start. Right? If you're already doing things with the Google Plus API, if you're already working with the stuff, you could use this data in that product. Right? But the spreadsheet was fun, and I'll give you that code as well if you ask me on Google Plus. So just to recap, there are these three big things. Right? This is implementation, adding items to your page, and connecting them. There's this optimization, getting them to be faster, putting things in the right place. There's this measurement, knowing what is working and what's not. If you put the button at the top, are you getting more plus ones? Or if you put it at the bottom, are you getting more plus ones? And then, of course, there's always this last step, which is repeat. Right, we're always adding functionality that you can insert on that implement phase, and looking for using your measurement to really hit that optimization phase again and again until you're getting the most value out of each of these components. And that's it. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Oh, and if I should mention this as well, I always forget to. If you liked this talk, please put one of these in those boxes back there. Plus ones. It's like a real life plus one. Isn't that neat? So please, questions.
You showed putting the border around images when someone plus ones on that device.
Yeah.
Is there a way to keep that border when they visit your site on another device, where just a cookie wouldn't do that?
So that's a great question. In this case, I've implemented that persistent data using a cookie. So the user has to be on the same browser, has to be the same user, can only get it from that domain. But obviously, if I was going to persist this data over a long time, I'd want something more robust in my own database that I'm submitting that to. And of course, you could use that in multiple devices. And to take that one step further, if you're using the sign-in button, you've got the user's identity from Google+, and you can use that to correlate that across multiple devices, because that's available soon on mobile as well.
So once the user is authorized, then the data will include the user identity as well?
So the authorization process, once the user grants access and you get that callback, you get their Google+ ID. Then it's up to you to
you just
store
store
that
it in
data.
a session. OK, got it, yeah. Question I have, the open graph tags or micro tagging, how often is it updated? Let's say I plus one the URL, and 1 week later I change the title. What will be the effect of that?
So that's a great question. When we fetch that page, we respect the cache headers that you're setting. So as soon as that cache expires, right, if a user creates a new post, we will refetch that.
and essentially the user post will change.
So if a user's already made a post, that post does not change.
Okay.
But new posts do. Because you wouldn't want to pull the rug under the user, right?
Why
like
not?
Change the content. Wow. Well, the reason is because, and we
Yeah.
believe really strongly at this at Google, is you don't want to surprise the user.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you know. Okay. Any other questions? Well, okay. Thank you so much for coming.